British Motors Corporation, or BMC, was formed in 1952 with the merger of Austin and Morris, two of Britain's biggest and most successful brands. Herbert Austin was one of the founders of Wolseley in 1901, along with the Vickers brothers. But after a falling out over engine development, he created his own company in 1905. Early Austin models were conservative and production numbers were low, partly due to limited capital. But by the beginning of the First World War, they were one of Britain's top producing brands, although Wolseley was first. Austin production for the war itself would increase tenfold, but that was not sustainable after the war. William Morris started building cars under his own name in 1912, using engineering purchased from other companies, such as engines from White and Pope, chassis from Rubery Owen, and axles and steering from Wrigley. And after building munitions during the war, production continued where it had left off. Austin, on the other hand, had moved to a single model philosophy and was in receivership by 1921, leading to restructuring and product expansion that included the Model 12 and 7. Initially, the Austin 7 was 106 inches long on a 75-inch wheelbase and used a 700cc four-cylinder with 7 horsepower, although that number would more than double during the 7's 17-year model run. And the success of the 7 can't be explained simply by sales numbers. Not only did it destroy its competition and what remained of the cycle car market, but brands such as BMW, Datsun, and Jeep all owe their existence to this car, at least to some degree. And it popularized a control layout that would eventually become the standard that we continue to use to this day, although it was a layout that originated with Cadillac. One of the 7's victims would be Wolseley, who would be taken over by Morris, while they had been expanding and Americanizing their production lines, and used Wolseley's advanced overhead cam engine design to launch the original Morris Minor, which led to the Morris Garage's MG Midget, a specialty sports car based on the standard Morris models. Technically, MG was an independent entity created in 1924, the same time that Morris created a separate commercial truck division. But MG would become a full part of Morris in 1935. And in 1938, Morris would also take over Riley Motors. Austin 7 production would end not long after, with 290,000 having been made by Austin, more under license by various companies around the world. But Europe had entered the Second World War by this point, and both companies would be used to build military aircraft, as well as tanks and other things, with Morris becoming the Newfield organization. After the war, Morris would introduce the successful Oxford and a new Minor that would go on to be their most successful model, soon to be followed at Austin by the A70, A30, and A40, with their transatlantic styling. The merger of Austin and Newfield in 1952 made British Motors the 4th largest car company in the world, behind the Big Three, and was supposed to return Britain to a leading position in the auto industry. But dated products that primarily competed with each other kind of put a damper on that. Initially, however, both sides benefited from the merger, and there would be extensive sharing of designs, particularly among the lower volume brands. Although MG would continue to find a successful niche of his own, primarily in the American market. Styling was quickly updated within a few years, and Austin would begin building the Metropolitan for both themselves and for American Motors. 1958 would be the start of the Farina-styled cars that would be used by all the BMC divisions. The big news, however, came in 1959 with the Mini, a front-wheel drive with a transversely mounted 850cc inline-4 with 33 horsepower. It was a marvel of efficient packaging and changed the way small cars would be designed. Length was 120 inches on an 80-inch wheelbase, weighing roughly 1,300 pounds, and performance was quite good for its size and price. Sold as both the Austin Mini Cooper and the Morris Mini Minor, and eventually a few other things, including simply as a Mini, and more formal variations, such as the Wolseley Hornet and Riley Elf. In the early 60s, Leyland purchased Standard Triumph and was beginning to pull market share from British Motors. So in 1965, BMC took control of Press Steel, and a year later, Jaguar, changing their name to British Motor Holdings, or BMH. And a year after that, they would merge with Leyland to become British Leyland. Although it now had even more brands under its umbrella, it was still down to the world's fifth largest car company, at which point, in spite of sales volumes, most models were selling at a loss. So a massive cost-cutting campaign was implemented. That created some quality control issues, while still failing to produce enough profit for any serious new development. But that didn't stop them from dropping their older brands and models and introducing new models. Alvis was phased out in 1967, the Standard brand was killed off in 1968, and Riley in 1969. Then the Morris Minor would go away in 1971 after 1.6 million had been made, and it was replaced by the Marina, which would prove to be popular, but later would be considered one of the worst cars ever made. It was followed a few years later by the Austin Allegro, a car that had great aspirations, but cost-cutting diluted the design down to something that could be viewed as the British Pacer, in both the sense that the final product was far from what it was supposed to be, and to some degree, the styling. And British Leyland continued to self-destruct from internal conflicts, causing it to become state-owned in 1975, allowing Ford and Vauxhall to take control of the British market, when the Princess would effectively spell the end of the Wolseley brand. Soon, Nissan and Toyota would be slicing off big chunks of the British market for themselves, and in 1981, Triumph would start making a version of the Honda Civic as the Triumph Acclaim. Then in 1982, British Leyland would become Austin Rover, with the Triumph and Morris names being killed off in 1984, and Jaguar being floated off to return as an independent the same year, which lasted roughly 5 years before they were taken over by Ford. What remained after that became the Rover Group in 1986, and was taken over by British Aerospace in 1988. Who would expand Rover's production of Honda-based products that they had taken over with the death of Triumph. Cars that were even marketed in the US for a short time under the name Sterling. And then BMW would buy them out in 1994, putting an end to Austin-branded cars. The Mini had become its own make in 1969 and had continued on with regular updates until 2000, when the company was reorganized again, still under BMW, as MG Rover, with Mini becoming a BMW subsidy, and Land Rover was sold off to Ford. The remaining assets were then sold to Nanjing in China in 2005, putting an end to Rover cars, as BMW retained the rights to that name. Less than 2 years later, Nanjing was purchased by the Shanghai Automotive Group, and the remaining cars would start to see production in China, with the previous Rover models being badged as Ro in the Chinese market and as MGs in most other markets. In 2011, they would get their first all-new models since the mid-90s, the MG6, and MG would start to see growth in the British market and elsewhere. But after 2017, the British factory was closed, making what remained fully Chinese. It's odd that Morris Garages is all that remains of a once vast British automobile empire, and as an import, with no hint of its sports car origins. Well, not all that remains. Technically, British Motors still exists as a commercial truck maker in Turkey, but they export to England. If you want to have input on the brand that I do next, check out the latest poll on my community page. And as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.